I'm Lieutenant James Carter. I'm 28 years old, stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and I've served in the U.S. Army for the past 10 years. I've led missions overseas, lost friends I still see in my sleep, and earned my place through sweat, grit, and discipline. But none of that prepared me for what happened last month. My father, Ronald Carter, walked back into my life after 18 years of silence. He didn't come with an apology or any interest in catching up. He came with a lawyer, a stack of documents, and a claim to a piece of my pension. I wish I were making that up. This is the man who left when I was 10. One morning, he just drove off with the last of our savings and never looked back. My mom raised me alone after that. We had years when ramen noodles were dinner, and the power got shut off more than once. She passed away 2 years ago, right before I got promoted. Never saw the bars on my shoulder, never heard me say I made it. And now this man, this stranger with my last name, he claims he never gave up legal rights as a parent, just signed some paperwork wrong. He says I owe him something for what he calls emotional investment. At first, I thought it was a joke. I thought maybe he was sick or confused, but he was calm, cold. It was about money, not love, not even regret. So here I am, telling you this story. Not because I want sympathy, but because people like him count on silence, and I've kept mine long enough. I still remember that morning like it's burned into the inside of my eyelids. The air in the house felt heavy, like the air before a storm. I could smell the stale coffee on the counter and the faint scent of my dad's aftershave, the one he used to wear when things were still good. I was 10 and didn't know what the word PTSD meant. All I knew was that my dad had been different since he came home from overseas. Quieter, meaner some nights. Gone inside his head in ways I couldn't reach. The sun had barely started pushing through the kitchen blinds when I heard the sound of his boots. Not the lazy shuffle he sometimes had, but a clean, sharp step like he was back on base. I sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the blanket Mom had sewn from old shirts, and watched him walk to the door with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back at me. He didn't look at my mom, either. She stood at the sink, frozen, her fingers pressed into the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. On the table, next to his empty coffee mug, was a small folded note. The paper looked too thin to hold something so heavy. "Don't wait up." That's all it said. 4 words that didn't make sense to a 10-year-old kid who still believed dads always came back. I waited anyway. I sat at the window for hours that day, watching every truck that passed. I told myself he'd just gone to clear his head. Those soldiers needed space sometimes. But the sun went down, the porch light came on, and the only sound in the house was the creak of the old ceiling fan. Mom didn't say a word. She just sat at the table with that note between her fingers like she was holding the last piece of something that used to be whole. I remember asking if he was coming back. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. That silence told me everything. That night was the first time I understood what it meant to be left. Not the way kids talk about losing toys or friends moving away. This was a hole being carved out in real time. I stared at the door, hoping the knob would turn, that maybe he'd walk back in and say he'd changed his mind. He didn't, and the next morning, the house felt like it belonged to someone else. After my dad left, I started waking up before my alarm. I'd make coffee for my mom, take out the trash, and try to patch whatever was broken in the house. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I figured it out, one squeaky faucet or cracked window at a time. By the time I was 12, I had a lawn mowing route in the neighborhood and washed cars on weekends. I'd come home with grease on my jeans and a few crumpled bills in my pocket. My mom never asked how I managed school and work. She just looked at me with tired eyes and a soft smile that broke my heart a little every time. Nobody on our street ever brought up my dad, but their eyes told me they knew. I started walking taller, trying to prove something no one ever said out loud. I carried his absence like a weight I refused to drop. And I made myself a promise. If I ever wore a uniform, it would mean something different. I'd wear it to protect, to show up, to stay, not to walk away. It was just after noon when I got the call from the admin office. Nothing urgent, just a request to come by and review a personnel file. I didn't think twice. I walked in with my sleeves rolled up, boots still dusty from the morning drills, and came to a dead stop. Sitting there, looking older but somehow smaller, was my father, Ronald Carter. Next to him sat a man in a suit, briefcase on his lap, and a smug expression like he had already won something. My father didn't stand. He just gave me a weak nod like we were picking up a conversation that had never started. I didn't say anything at first. My eyes stayed on him, waiting for my mind to catch up with the fact that he was really here, breathing the same air. 18 years of silence collapsed into that room. Then the lawyer started talking. He said Ronald was here to assert a legal claim over part of my military pension. Something about outdated records listing him as my last guardian. I laughed once. Short, sharp, then asked him to repeat it, just to hear how ridiculous it sounded the second time. My father didn't flinch. He let the lawyer speak for him if he had given up using his own voice years ago. I looked him in the eyes and asked what made him think he deserved anything from me. What made him think walking back into my life with paperwork and greed could erase what he left behind. He didn't answer, just looked tired. I saw the bags under his eyes, the way his jacket hung loose like he hadn't eaten in weeks, but none of it softened me. The anger sat under my skin like fire in my veins. I remembered the note, "Don't wait up." I remembered holding it in my 10-year-old hands, not knowing how to stop the kind of pain that didn't leave bruises. And now he was back, not to ask for forgiveness, but to collect. I told the lawyer the paperwork was a mistake and that it would be corrected immediately. That man wasn't my guardian. He was a ghost with a name, nothing more. He tried to speak then. My father tried to explain something maybe, but I held up my hand. Not here. Not like this. There's a kind of cold that lives in the space where love used to be. I felt it that day, watching him gather his papers and walk out again, slower this time. The lawyer gave me a look I won't forget, like this was just the beginning. And maybe it was. But if he thought this uniform meant I could be pushed, he had no idea what I'd built from the ruins he left behind. The house felt smaller without her in it. I was sorting through drawers, boxing up the pieces of her life one photo frame at a time. In the back of her closet, behind an old sewing kit and a shoebox full of expired coupons, I found a heavy wooden box sealed with masking tape, yellowed at the edges. It took a minute to open. Inside, folded neatly beneath a stack of old receipts and insurance forms, was a letter. Her handwriting was unmistakable. I sat on the floor and read it in silence, the pages soft and thin like they had been touched 100 times before. She wrote about the months after my father left. How did he not just vanish? He signed away his rights in exchange for a check from someone in the family with deep pockets and quiet motives. There was a copy of the agreement, stamped and dated. And another document, one I'd never seen. It was a court file listing Ronald's voluntary termination as my guardian. Only the signature at the bottom wasn't his. Not quite. It looked close, but off. Like someone tried to forge it, hoping no one would look too close. I stared at that paper for a long time. The anger that had burned inside me for years suddenly felt misplaced, or at least unfinished. If he hadn't just walked away, if he'd been pushed or paid to disappear, what did that mean about everything I thought I knew, and who was behind it? The letter didn't name names, just a warning. She wrote that some family ties are poisoned at the root, that she had tried to shield me from the worst of it but couldn't keep every truth hidden forever. That if I ever found the box, it meant the rest was mine to face. Grief pressed hard against my chest. Losing her was enough, but now it came with questions I couldn't ignore. Someone had traded me like a problem to be solved, and whoever signed that check had written their silence into the fine print of my childhood. That day, sitting in her closet with the box in my lap, I stopped seeing my story as one of just abandonment. It became something else, a cover-up, a choice made in quiet rooms by people who never paid the price. I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and made a silent promise. I wasn't done asking questions. The signature kept pulling at me. Every time I looked at that form, something felt off. I took it to the JAG office on base and asked to speak with someone in legal review. They ran the document through archive comparison tools and found what I suspected. The signature didn't match any verified legal records filed by Ronald Carter. It had been forged. That led us to a name buried in an old personnel database. Clay Maddox. He had worked in admin services at Fort Benning around the same time Ronald supposedly gave up custody. His file was clean on paper, but the officer I spoke to raised an eyebrow. Maddox had a reputation back in the day for making problems disappear, mostly for officers with influence and family ties. I dug deeper. It took a few calls and a trip across state lines, but I found him. Clay was in a modest retirement facility just outside Montgomery. His hands trembled when I met him, but his eyes were sharp. I told him who I was, showed him the letter and the form. He didn't deny it, didn't even try. He looked out the window for a while before saying he remembered Ronald. Said the man looked defeated when he came in. But the paperwork wasn't Ronald's idea. The instructions came from someone representing the Carter Trust. A quiet man in a suit with a blank check and a deadline. Clay said he'd done worse for less. Back then, a favor like that earned you protection. A long leash. He signed Ronald's name and filed the document under an internal system that was never meant to be audited. It passed because no one was supposed to care. A single father with PTSD. A quiet discharge. A custody transfer no one questioned. I asked him who signed the check. He didn't know the name, but he remembered the initials on the envelope, WC. That narrowed it down to 2 people in the family. One of them was already dead. The other was still sitting on the board of trustees for the Carter Foundation. My father hadn't simply walked out on us. He'd been pushed, bought off, and replaced by a silence sealed with money. The rage I'd carried for years shifted. It wasn't gone, it was focused. Someone wanted me removed from the picture. Raised just far enough away to never inherit, but close enough to stay on paper. I left the facility with Clay's confession recorded on my phone and a file of documents he offered me voluntarily. He said he was sorry, but I didn't believe him. He wasn't trying to make it right. He was just tired of hiding. I got back in my truck and stared at the dashboard for a long time before turning the key. Everything I had believed about my childhood was fractured now. The man I had hated for leaving was just another pawn. The real betrayal came with a signature, a stamp, and a quiet directive from someone who shared my last name. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was deliberate. I wasn't chasing closure. I was chasing the truth, and I was done playing by their rules. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. I sat at the defense table, hands folded tight, trying to keep my pulse steady. Across from me, my father looked almost smug, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and a lawyer who never stopped smiling. The room was full. JAG officers, military reporters, and even a few local news cameras lined the back wall. They all wanted to see how a decorated Army lieutenant got dragged into court by the man who left him as a child. His lawyer opened strongly, leaning hard on a claim that I owed Ronald partial financial support under old dependency paperwork. They framed it as oversight, a mistake buried in bureaucracy, a son refusing to honor a legal obligation. I listened, jaw tight, saying nothing. That was the plan. Let them speak. Let them dig. When it was my turn, my attorney didn't rise with a binder full of objections. He just asked one question. Was my father ever legally relieved of his parental rights? The judge raised an eyebrow. The opposing counsel objected. The room tensed. Then we submitted Exhibit C, a silver USB drive no larger than a house key. We plugged it into the court's media system. The speakers crackled. A voice came through, worn but clear. It was Clay Maddox, recorded in his own words just 3 weeks earlier. He explained how the signature was forged. He was paid by an unnamed Carter family member to remove Ronald from the official record without a court hearing. He admitted the paperwork was fake, that Ronald knew it, that he had come back now, hoping no one would dig too deep. The room went still. You could feel the shift. Reporters leaned in. The judge looked directly at Ronald, who had stopped breathing through his nose and was now visibly shaking. His lawyer leaned away from him like distance might offer protection. The recording ended, and silence returned like a curtain falling. I turned and looked at him, not with hate, not even with anger, just a stare, flat and final. He didn't meet my eyes. Ronald stood up, his knees buckled slightly, and he grabbed the back of his chair. He mumbled something about being tricked, about not knowing. No one responded. The judge didn't even blink. My attorney asked the court to dismiss the case immediately and submit the audio as evidence for potential fraud charges. The judge nodded. Case dismissed. The reporters got their soundbite. The military personnel got their headline. But I got something else. I got truth. I got it on tape. Outside, the sky was cloudless. I stepped down the courthouse steps slowly, ignoring the flashes of cameras and voices shouting my name. I wasn't walking away a hero. I wasn't looking for applause. I had spent years carrying a wound that was never mine to hold. Now, for the first time, I could breathe without the weight of that story pressing against my spine. The truth didn't erase the pain, but it replaced the shame. And that was more than enough. In the days that followed, Ronald disappeared again. No appeals, no letters, just silence, the kind I had grown used to. Only this time, it didn't sting, it didn't stick. I had faced him, faced the lie, and I didn't flinch. What he tried to take from me, my dignity, my name, my worth, he never had a claim to begin with. And the world knew it now.